This is Roy Seals with Global Faith Mission Agency, and today we have the privilege of having Brian Burkholder with us, all the way from South Florida. And Brian, you and I just had the opportunity to be together a few days ago for a very special meeting. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was the retirement service for a mutual friend of ours named Claudio Jimenez. Claudio, for the last 18 years, has been pastoring the Iglesia Biblica Cristiana in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I had the privilege of loosely helping. I say that because I wasn't there when they started the church, nor did I do any of the work, but somehow I've been credited for helping to start that church. So Claudio started that church 18 years ago and has done a great job of pastoring it. And this past weekend, he actually stepped down and retired, even though he's not retiring from a missionary, retired from the church, and the church was officially handed over to another Argentine young man. So as you said, it was just a wonderful experience as we were able to kind of see the passing of the baton from one leader to another, which is obviously what we want to see happen in missions and churches that are started on the foreign field, and obviously as well here in the United States.
Well, it was a blessing also for me to be involved with that. And man, you had some great words for both Claudio and the church. And I was blessed to be a part of that and observe this. But let's go back to the very beginning, because what you've just briefly described is the last several years of Claudio, with this church plant. And he was the one that planted that church, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So he started the church, birthed that church, and then, he saw it grow. He prepared leadership, and now he has transitioned out. And as you said, that's our goal. But let's go back to the very beginning. And how did the connection work out between you and Claudio? He's from Argentina. You're from the United States. Where did this all connect?
Yeah, so my wife and I were missionaries in Mexico City for about 10 years. And we'd been there a couple of years and already planted our first work. And we're in the process of beginning a second work near our home. And so I was just out one afternoon knocking on doors, quite frankly, not something that I did very often. And I was out knocking on doors in this apartment complex, just going door to door, inviting people to our services. And I knocked on one door, and this lady opened up with a strange accent. This is the best way that I could describe it. I could tell right away that she was not Mexican. She was Argentine. And of course, that was Noemi. And shortly thereafter, I met her husband, Claudio, and found out that they were missionaries with Word of Life in Mexico City. And we had an instant affinity with each other. We were about the same age. Their daughters were just about the same ages as my two sons. They had a heart for reaching people in Mexico City. And there was like an instant connection between them and us. So much so that next Sunday, my wife and I went by their house, picked them up, took them to church with us. And that really is almost like a rest of the story from there, because from that point on, God really bonded our hearts together. And Claudio attended our church for several years and then began leading the youth in our church, and then actually left Word of Life and went full-time into pastoral ministry, and was the associate pastor along with me there for several years. And then about 1998, when the Lord led us back to the United States, Claudio was officially called the pastor of that church. And he led that church. He did a great job for about 6 years, led him through an extensive building campaign, and the church maintained its strength. And then I think it was in 2003, somewhere along those lines, that God began pulling them back to their home country of Buenos Aires. And I remember I was in Buenos Aires on a missions trip, not visiting him, but visiting another Argentine missionary, and he was down there. And he asked me to fly to Buenos Aires. I was in Rosario, and he asked me to fly to Buenos Aires. So I flew to Buenos Aires, and I think it was there that he actually shared his heart with me about leaving Mexico and starting a church in Buenos Aires. And quite frankly, in the beginning, I wasn't too excited about it because I wanted him to stay at our church in Mexico City. And but at the end of the day, I mean, no doubt it was God was in the whole thing. And as I just mentioned, in 2004, they started the church, and he pastored it for 18 years and did a great job. As you well know, that church planting in Buenos Aires is not an easy task. It's a difficult place to start a church, and he did a great job. Never really became huge. I think about 70 or 80 people, but it was very solid, very stable. And several years ago, God brought a young man in his congregation by the name of David. And David was trained, and I think he was trained professionally as a pastor, but then also just spent time with Claudio and then became the assistant pastor, and now is officially the pastor of Iglesia Biblica Cristiana. So it really is. I mean, we're able to sit back. I mean, you and I that have been in ministry for a long time, it's such a blessing to sit back and see that full cycle of missions take place. And I think that was what was so exciting and joyful about this past weekend, is we were able to do that.
Well, you've been through 2 pastoral transitions with Claudio then. In Mexico City,
Absolutely.
you started this church, he became the pastor, so you transitioned out. And now, years later, you participated in the service in which he has resigned now as pastor, the founding pastor, and somebody else. So that was pretty neat to see that. I was thinking about that the other day when we were on that Zoom meeting, because you and I participated by technology, service down there in Argentina. Now, but let me go back to the beginning one more time, just for our viewers to grasp the magnitude of this and how God led. You were in Mexico City. You did not know Claudio or Noemi.
Had no idea. No idea who they were. Didn't know they were in the city. I'm not even sure I knew that Word of Life was active in Mexico City at that point. Yeah. So I'm randomly out knocking on doors. I know where you're going, in a city of 30 million people in the valley. And guess whose door I knock on? And I only knocked on like 20 doors that day, Roy. It's not like I'm out knocking on hundreds and hundreds of doors. I knocked on 20 doors, and one of those doors just happened to be Claudio and Noemi. That's got to be a God moment. Absolutely has to be a God moment.
That was exactly that. That's like an Acts 16 experience where the Holy Spirit led you to a specific place, because a lot of people do not realize the magnitude of megacities. A megacity is a metropolitan area that has over 10 million people. You just don't run into people in a city that big. And so Mexico City, not only you have that immediate population, but in the entire metropolitan area and that valley, they call it El Valle right there, there's 30 million people. And you knocked on their door that day. Well, that is incredible.
Let me just clarify. I still never knocked on all 30 million doors. So I only got about 20 or 40 or something like that. So no, but that's absolutely remarkable when you think about even the probability of that is placed it within God parameters there,
Well, it's neat to see how God brings us together. And once again, I often go back to the book of Acts when I look at the first century example of missions. And Barnabas was led of God to meet Paul. And then later on, as they become missionaries, Barnabas and Paul, they are led of the Lord to meet other people that became part of their team in that first century missionary movement. And that is exactly what happened. So now that years later, years have gone by, and Claudio has resigned as pastor. You said it a moment ago, he has not resigned from ministry.
Right.
So he's moving to another part of Argentina. Is that correct?
Yeah, he's going to move south to a city called Monte, and going to be helping a church plant there. So there's already a church planter that's there, and he wants Claudio to come in and work in the area of discipleship, discipling young couples. So, Claudio, like us, is getting to the stage of his life that he's sitting back saying, man, I don't know whether I want the weight, the stress, the pressure of being the only the lead pastor of a church. And so he kind of pulled back from that, but obviously still has a heart for missions, still going to be a part of Global Faith, Global Faith's mission organization, but just doing it in a different part of Argentina with maybe a different focus.
Well, it sounds like a lot of what he will be doing now is helping mentor and coach some of the young Argentine pastors, because by now he has a few decades of ministry experience. So he's been there, and he's been there, and he's done that.
Yeah. And I think he's got the reputation as well and the testimony. So, I mean, his itinerary is already filling up. His churches in Buenos Aires are finding out that he's open and available. So I think he's got like 5 Sundays booked where he's going to be preaching before he actually makes that transition. So, yeah. I mean, you know as well as I do with Manuel in Mexico, there's something almost grandfatherly about it. As you sit back and observe that taking place, there's a sense of holy satisfaction as you see God not only working in Claudio's life, but then in David's life. And you've seen the same thing with Manuel there in the Yucatan and those situations.
Well, absolutely. Well, the other night when we were participating in the meeting, I was in North Carolina speaking at a Spanish church that weekend, and you were there in Florida. And by the way, you're surrounded by Hispanics where you are.
Absolutely.
And a wonderful opportunity to reach multiple nationalities. But as you and I were participating all the way over in the Southern Hemisphere in Buenos Aires, Argentina, I was blessed. It was a thrill to see their 2 daughters get up and give a testimony. Yep. And they were just little girls when they had migrated back to Argentina. Now they're both married and adults.
Well, I met Lucy. See, when we met Claudio and Noemi, Lucy, their oldest one was 4, and Debbie was just born. I think Debbie was only like about 3 months old. And now to see them as beautiful, because they're beautiful young ladies, married. Lucy's got kids, actively involved in their dad's ministry. That's really cool too.
Well, that makes you feel old, Brian. I mean, good night. You've got to be an old guy by now.
I am, Roy. I'm not near as old as you, but
okay.
I'm catching up as fast as I possibly can. I might look it, but I'm not. I'm not.
Well, we'll move on from that. One of the things that blessed my heart the other night when I saw this is when both daughters were asked, because this was a special service in which they were honoring Claudio and also pointing the church towards the new pastor. Mm-hmm. And he's nobody new because he's been there, but still they were redirecting the focus of the people now to a new pastor. But Lucy and Debbie so eloquently articulated their feelings and their emotions about their dad's ministry and what it was like to grow up in a pastor's home.
Yeah. Well, you know as well as I do, I mean, it's not rare, but it certainly is not extremely common for pastors' kids to be so complimentary of their dad's ministry. And I think it just shows the character of Claudio and Noemi, that not only did they, faithfully serve for 30 or 40 years, whatever it was, but more importantly, God used them to raise up 2 godly girls that love Jesus and still love the Lord and aren't tarnished and tainted by ministry. And they certainly didn't seem to be in their testimonies at all. They seemed to be, very excited about all that God was doing and very much involved in what mom and dad had done and are still doing.
I want to come back at another time, Brian, and let's have another interview like this, because what I want to do now with you in the next interview is focus on the opportunities, but also the challenges of church planting in mega cities. I think a lot of our American people by nature are drawn to the remote, the faraway land, that distant village. And yet it's in the mega cities where you have the millions and the millions of people. Mm-hmm. And most folks do not understand the challenge of that. So I'd like to be back with you here in a few weeks, and let's do another interview and talk about the challenge of reaching the mega cities.
Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, not only are there challenges, because it's certainly not jungle ministry or remote ministry, even though obviously some people call it a concrete jungle that we're in, right. But you do have to approach it differently. But I also have the conviction that if we're ever going to really reach those countries for the gospel, you have to reach those areas of influence. If you look at the Apostle Paul went to the areas of influence, and that's where he did his ministry. And I think because of the difficulties, I remember when we went to Mexico City years ago, they told me, Brian, Mexico City is a missionary graveyard.
Yeah.
You're not going to last long. And I mean, maybe they were to a certain degree right. We lasted 10 years, but that is because of the difficulty of reaching those places. So that would be an interesting conversation.
Well, and you did not quit there. I mean, God redirected your steps. And I would like to talk at another time about that also, how God sometimes redirects our steps.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, thanks for being with us today. And I want to leave us with this. Claudio is still in the ministry, right? And he is on missionary status now. So if there's anybody out there that is listening and you would like to help an Argentine missionary / pastor and is working in Argentina, you think about it, it's a tremendous investment. He knows the language, it's his mother culture, and he's immediately effective where he is. So Claudio would be a great person to add to the mission program of your church, or if you individually want to support him, contact us here at Global Faith Mission Agency, and we'll help you as you would like to support a person like this. Brian, thank you for being with us today. Any last words?
No, not. I would only second that Claudio and Noemi are worthy of support. So if anybody wants to support them, I would wholeheartedly encourage you to do that.
All right. Well, thank you for being with us, and we'll be back soon talking about more ministry opportunities in the large cities around the world. God bless. Have a wonderful day.